Good Thursday afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Patristicast. Today, got George Tsakiridis with us. George, you are where? South Dakota State University, is that right? Is it your senior lecturer in philosophy and religion?
That is correct.
That is correct. Now, my fans, the millions of them that follow this podcast, will really appreciate the fact that you, George, have an IMDb account.
I do.
You're a Hollywood celebrity.
Something like that. But yeah, I've been involved in film for probably about 11 years.
Well, that's going to come in handy at the beginning here because I got a few things I want to say about Seinfeld.
The errands of grievances.
Before we get started, but anyway, welcome to Patristicast, George. I thought this would be a fun conversation between the three of us.
Yeah, this will be good. I mean, I've known you guys for a while.
Yeah, we go back a few years.
That's so.
We've got a few things to talk about. We have your work on Evagrius. You've done some work. You've got a book on Evagrius.
Mm-hmm.
You also had said you're also working on something with theology and Spider-Man. Maybe we can touch on briefly. And
Sure.
then the three of us all are regulars at the Pappas Summer Patristics Institute, which I think is worthwhile to talk about.
We can talk about that.
What order would you like to go in?
Oh, this is like match game. Like choose A, B, or C in this case.
And the power is in your hands.
Let's start off by talking about Pappas, actually. Let's do that. Start with relationships.
Relationships. All right. Well, before we start, though, I have to say, I don't think I've ever told you this before. Maybe I did at Pappas at some time, but when I see your name, Tsakiridis, the first thing that comes to mind is Dr. Sarah Tsakiridis from a Seinfeld.
The dermatologist, yes.
Yes, that's right, the dermatologist. Pimple Popper, MD.
That's right. Pimple Popper.
From an episode in season 9.
Is that Marcia Cross, I think, plays?
Marcia Cross, that's right. The redhead from...
Desperate Housewives.
Desperate Housewives, that's right. Oh, look at Dawn is blushing.
I know my TV. We'll see if I know my patristics, but I know my TV.
Yeah. As long as you know your Seinfeld, I really don't care if you know your patristics. Seinfeld is good.
Fair. Fair, that's fair. We can talk about the Latvian Orthodox Church then.
Well, I am thinking about converting. I just have to I have to do what is that called again? On your hand, the little cheat sheet he made on his hand.
I mean, just make sure you're in it for the hats.
Yeah, that's right. That's the most important part. Well,
and you don't have the Kavorka.
I think I am. I think I do have the Kavorka, the lure of the animal.
The lure of the animal. I'm sure that Gregory Nazianzen talked about that in one of his treatises.
I think it's in there somewhere. Origen certainly did. Origen had the Kavorka.
It's in the back somewhere.
Well, the hats and the Orthodox stuff brings us to Pappas. What a natural segue. See, Seinfeld is, good for everything, pretty much.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Very smooth.
It is smooth, So
Smooth
Pappas.
as Jerry's chest after he shaved it on Seinfeld. Oh, I got you with that one then. All right. But yeah, the Pappas Patristics Institute.
I started something that I, probably shouldn't have, but I'm sure Seinfeld will get brought up again every once in a while throughout this. So Pappas, yes. The three of us met at Pappas. I think my first year there was 2015. But what is Pappas? What is tell the world what Pappas is.
I wish I had the description right here. The Pappas Patristics Institute is was made possible by a generous grant from, which is what it does say.
Yes.
The Institute, I think, has been going since like 2004-ish. And it was, there was a grant by the Pappas family that gave this money. It's housed at Holy Cross Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline, Massachusetts. And the first few years, they started with a graduate conference. I don't know if you guys have been to that.
Been there a few times, yeah.
Okay. And actually, I've never been to that.
Oh.
But I've been going to the summer program actually since the first program in 2007.
You've been going there that long?
I started as a student. I became a TF in training. I became then a teaching fellow, and then I became an instructor. Yeah.
Huh.
So I've been there for a long time.
Don, how long have you been going there for?
Yeah, about same as you, 2015, the conference, the grad student conference. I don't know if you came to that one.
2015. I went to the institute in the Summer Institute in 2015. The first grad conference I went to was 2016. Because you and Sid seem to have a lot more knowledge of it than I did when I got there. So I assumed you'd been going there for some time.
Yeah, no, we just went the first time in 2015, and then every summer since, until recently, of course.
It's a wonderful little program that Bruce Beck has going there. You know, a bunch of people, and it's not just academics. Yeah, I remember the first year I was there, there was a psychiatrist who was there, or a psychotherapist. I can't remember which one she was. Her and her husband. And then there's let's see. There's that guy from Oregon. What's his name?
He's a minister in the ELCA. Yes.
That's right.
Stewart.
He's not an academic.
Yep, Stewart.
Stewart, yeah, but he's not an academic. So it's really I think it's a pretty novel concept. And
so we could talk about like the format a little bit. So like the grad school conference is fairly standard, I think, although it does offer a lot of peer critique, and you guys have done it. So like you actually present a paper and get critique from another presenter, which is nice. In a lot of conferences, you have that guy who rambles on for 10 minutes with a incoherent question, and then everyone rolls their eyes and you go home. But
they give you before asking a question. Yeah, you get that.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote a paper like this back in 1972. But anyway, so yeah, you get that. But the summer program is this series of seminars where people sit around and actually engage the actual patristic text. So you read the text, you do deep readings, and like you're saying, having people of different backgrounds really benefits that. Mm-hmm. So you have people in the medical field, you have lay people, you have ministers, you have academics, you have grad students, and everyone's reading it from a different perspective. And so you're getting things out of the text that you wouldn't get in, a kind of standard academic conference. Right. Yeah, and I think many of us there. Oh, go ahead.
There's not really any lecturing.
Not much. I mean, yeah, it's just a little bit of overview from whoever is the instructor, and then it's the text is the teacher. Mm-hmm. And it's really been great. I've really enjoyed it. Obviously, I've been going for a number of years. We weren't able to meet last year because of COVID, and this year we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's been excellent. I've met a lot of good people, made friends. It's just a nice little academic. It's like academic summer camp is really what it is.
It kind of is, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a way to put it.
Complete with dorm life.
That's right. Yeah, that's not always pleasant. It does get fairly warm there.
It does. There's no air conditioning. It's very humid in Boston in the summer.
Yeah. And it's an old building, but
yeah,
we make
that's
it
the aesthetic component of the week.
We go 2 nights a week.
Yeah, I was going to say Bruce is very strategic. I think he tricks you. As a student, you go to the grad student conference, and I don't know if it's still the case, but when we went, they put you up at the hotel, whatever hotel it was, nice swanky hotel. You take the van in. Come back for the summer and be a TF. Oh yeah, that sounds great. And then we cook in the dorms, which is still lovely. and eat in the cafeteria during one of the 37 fasts in the year, but it's still good.
I don't think you guys were there though. The cafeteria used to be non-air conditioned also.
Oh man.
And
That would be terrible.
that was hot. But actually the first couple years of the program we stayed at a conference center the first year. Second year, I think we stayed at like a Hilton or a Hyatt or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the third year we were in the dorms, and honestly, it was like a really cool summer. It was the best experience. And every summer after that has been fairly humid. At least generally speaking, but it's been great. And I mean, I know both of you have made some good friends there, and it's, you know, you get access to a lot of great people and great texts, and, you know, you get access to Red Sox games if you so choose.
Yeah, you know, the one year, when was it, Don? 2018 that we went to the Red Sox game? You, me, Sean Moberg.
Yeah, wasn't it the last year we went?
I
2019?
bet 18 is right, because 19 it was not possible, I think.
I didn't go in 2019. I had too much going on that summer.
Oh, that's right. So yeah, 2018 then.
2018, I think it was. Yeah, and you had to return to campus to get your ticket once we
Jimmy
got
Chan.
to Oakford.
Jimmy Chan, help me out.
Jimmy, that's right. You had to get Jimmy Chan to go into your room and get your ticket.
Yeah, forgot my ticket. That's all right. Only
It's
missed
part
an
of the
inning or
story
so.
now. You got to have
part
that
of the story. Yeah,
It's about narrative and
it
perspective.
is. Learning the Boston train system and
The T.
yeah.
It's so dirty. It's old. They need to upgrade it big time.
I don't know if it's any dirtier than New York or Chicago or any of the other subways I've been on, but
No, I remember I was out in New Jersey for about 6 months, and I would go into the city. The subways were cleaner than I thought they would be.
okay. I mean, you guys are in Ontario now, so like the Toronto, I mean, like when I'm in Vancouver, the train is immaculate compared to, you know, some of the U.S. cities.
That's
Same
right.
with Montreal. I was up there. Yeah, you guys have some nice subways.
Well, so aside from the nice subways we have up here,
That's right.
both of you, now I have never taught a course at Pappas, but both of you do. So what are the courses you guys have taught?
Don, you want to go first?
Yeah, Don, why don't you go?
Sure, why don't I go? Well, I've only taught the one, so it's pretty easy to describe.
You've only taught one?
Yeah. Well, the same course 3 times.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, you had the three-peat.
I had the 3-peat, yeah. And it almost became the unprecedented 4-peat last year when he tried to get us to, at the last second, do what were we going to do? We were going to do something online, weren't we? And he said, no new courses.
That was in discussions, yes.
Right.
There was.
So anyway, it didn't happen. But yeah, no, I taught on the, no surprise to any of our previous listeners, Irenaeus on the spiritual life and touching on various aspects of that. And we talked a little bit about the format of the course, and that's the fascinating and really beneficial thing for us, I think, you know, when we're studying these materials, and then to present them. Well, actually, not so much to present, but, you know, it's the best gig in the world, George, isn't it? Because pretty well we just sit back,
Yeah.
and we've prepared the course pack, and then so one time John here was my TF, so I just sat and John led the discussion, and they read through Irenaeus, and so to hear, as you said, not just other students, but you mentioned the psychologist, and there was a medical doctor one time, and to hear their approach to the texts and what jumps out for them, it's actually really helpful and allows things to come out that you don't really think about. And the other thing that for me has been really helpful, as you guys know, being from a Protestant background, when I first came to Pappas, it was, I'd hardly interacted with any Orthodox scholars and not a lot of Catholics. And it's almost, I would say roughly 3 fairly equal thirds of representation among Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants. Not perfectly, but they're all strong enough in their representation. And so to hear, again, people from all ages and backgrounds, and we're all around this under the same text, it's really, really an interesting exercise. And so I've done that, as I said, 3 years, and it was helpful for me, especially. So when was the last summer we did it? 2019?
Yep, I think so.
So I guess the first 2 times I was the instructor, I hadn't quite graduated yet. So it would have, it was a help for me, and during that stage of the dissertation writing. And so, it was great. Wonder, I hope we can one day return. Man alive.
And there's no writing involved, right? We just read and we talk about the texts. I mean,
for most. I mean, they actually used to have an option where you could take it for credit and write a paper.
Huh.
But I think that's gone. That's dormant right now, let's say. And but yeah, most people don't. It's just really good conversation over the text, just like Patristicast.
That's kind of how I'm modeling this podcast, is on Pappas Patristics. In certain respects, that's actually accurate. Yeah. That's an accurate description.
I think it's a good way to approach it.
Well, what's more enjoyable than just a couple of people sitting down and having a conversation about things that they love?
Yeah,
for sure.
How did you get into it, George? So you've been doing this, you said, since when? 2007 or 2008?
2007, yeah. So, well, let me mention the courses that I've taught to follow up on the previous question. So basically, I've taught 2 courses, but they've had some different incarnations. So I taught a course on prayer in the early church, and I taught that for 5 years. And then I taught a course basically that has changed names every time and been tweaked, but the course is basically on guilt, forgiveness, repentance in the early church. And so my early work, was on Evagrius. I wrote a book on Evagrius, and then I did some work with kind of guilt and repentance and reconciliation in the fathers. And my work is interdisciplinary, so it engages religion and science. So basically it's taking early Christianity and putting it in dialogue with science. And we can get to that later. But to get your next question, so Bruce and I never figured this out, Bruce, the director. I was in grad school at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, and I was walking through the halls, and there was this flyer on one of the doors for the Pappas Patristics Institute summer program. And a friend of mine from my master's program actually was one of the TFs that year. And I saw his name and I saw his program, and I was like, oh, this would be great. And I'll give you the long version here, but I wanted to go to, I think it was Northern Ireland. There's like a Greek program that they have, an intensive Greek. Are you guys familiar with that? I'm blanking on, it's in the UK, like mainland now, I don't know, in Scotland or somewhere, but it used to be in Belfast. So I wanted to do that, and it was just going to be more time and more expense. So kind of my wife and I decided, hey, you could go to Pappas Patristics. This looks good. And I just planned on it being a one-time thing, but ended up really loving it. If I'll give the full disclosure here, you guys are getting the real stuff right here.
Oh boy.
I'm honored.
So anyone who knows the program might enjoy this. Everyone else is like, can we get to the meat here? But the next year I was chosen to be a TF in training, but not a TF. And I was like, you know what? I'm a PhD student, and most of the people who are PhD students are TFs. I don't know if I want to go. And my wife was like, well, you really enjoyed it last year. You should go. So I was like, okay, I'll go. So like that was the hump. That was the roadblock. Once I got past that, it was great. I was a TF the next year. And again, there was another roadblock. I was a TF, and I was, not going to be teaching. And so I told Bruce, and this is true story. I told Bruce, hey, I really love this program. It was the end of the week of the third year. I said, I really love this program. I will do anything you want to stay with the program. Like, I'll sweep floors, I'll do whatever. And some years it would be more fun to sweep floors. I mean, honestly, but but the next year he brought me back kind of as like an assistant director for the summer program to help out with things. And I did get a course that year and had a course every year since, except for one where I gave a guest lecture. And it just has been really a central part of it. And I've gotten to know a lot of people, and it's been this great story, but it really started, I really caught on in large part because I just said, I love this thing. I want to be a part of it, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. And, and now it's over 10 years later from that. I think it's 12 years later. So it's great. And I mean, I think one of the things that is great about that program is most people are pretty humble. I mean, they approach it, and I don't mean that in any kind of bragging way. I think people approach it, they love patristics, they love each other, mm-hmm. and they want to enjoy this program. And so the egos, I mean, there's a little ego there. People aren't perfect, but it isn't like you would see in a lot of, grad conferences or academic conferences where people are posturing. There's not a lot of that. And so, it's been good, and hopefully it gets back on track post-COVID, and we're,
Yeah, that was
we have the next generation of scholars coming in.
That was one of the things I found quite refreshing about the Summer Institute, is that there really isn't a lot of competition. There isn't a lot of posturing. Like you said, there's, maybe one or two who like to think that they know more than everybody else and, will lecture the group. But for the most part, that's just not the case.
Yeah.
But we're using some insider lingo here. So TF, the teaching fellow, rather than the course instructor. The teaching fellow is the one who does all the hard work, right?
It's just like academia used to be, where you'd have a professor and the grad student would do everything. Now that doesn't exist much anymore, but that here at Pappas Patristic, it exists.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, tradition never dies in some places.
But in a way, there's a lot of good that comes with that too, because then the teaching fellow really gets that experience, you get some teaching experience, you get experience working with somebody and getting a kind of a mini mentorship during the week. And I enjoy that aspect of it. It's fun to mentor or be mentored.
Yeah, it was great to be mentored by Don over here. He was a wonderful mentor. I don't think he talked to me once during the whole week, but it's a great experience.
That's old school academia right there.
Yeah,
Figure it out for yourself.
Well, it's funny. I remember, not dissimilar to what you just said, George, about when I went in 2015 to the student conference in the spring. Mm-hmm. At the end of that, Bruce gave his little spiel to promote the summer.
Yeah. And
he says at the end, he says, "Oh, and if you're a PhD student, we have this TF thing." And so he described it briefly, but I almost thought I heard him say, "Okay, yeah, come in the summer, be a TF," and it almost sounded like to get on track to be an instructor. I was like, "Oh, this sounds great, absolutely." So that's why I came back. So then you get there, and I realize that a teaching fellow in training is
yeah.
I mean, you didn't really do anything. Sat at the table and listened to the real TF, listened to the instructor. I didn't realize how many levels down the totem pole I was.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I was very fortunate because it just happened that 2 years later, a door opened and I was able to jump right into being an instructor in my third year. So I was no complaints for me there, but so that worked out well. The other thing that you just said that caught my attention, I think I misheard you, because did you say that you were at a school in Chicago and you saw some promotional advertising for the Pappas Patristics Summer Program?
Is
that
correct.
What you said?
And Bruce and I have talked about this. We have no idea how it got there. I mean, maybe it was divine intervention. Who knows? But yeah, I have no idea how it got there. but it was there. And I don't think it's ever been there since, except for maybe the next year or two I put them up there, you know. But yeah, it's a very weird thing because we don't get a lot of people from Chicago at the program. I mean, I'm from Chicago actually personally, but obviously I've been in South Dakota for like almost 11 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of people from Chicago there, do we? We get people from the West Coast who go out there.
Yep.
We had Paulina from Finland.
That's right.
It's David from Montreal, but not a lot from Chicago.
No, it's northeast, heavy northeast, which makes sense.
Yeah, that's right. It's a beautiful campus. You know, it's what is it on the highest point in the Boston area?
That might be right, because actually, like, so the old building on campus there, I think it was at one time an estate, and that was the mansion, you know, on this high mountain, and it's a beautiful view, and the land was donated by, you know, in the original founding of the school. I think it was in 1937.
Okay.
I've looked at the plaque, like the cornerstone plaque on that building, too many times, probably. But yeah, it's great. I hope that we can. I mean, patristics is such a central part of Christian tradition. Obviously, it's great to have a place where people can kind of shoot the breeze about it and not feel the pressure of a conference or, you know, or a grad school situation.
It's the only program of its kind that I'm aware of anywhere, not just in North America, but anywhere, I think.
Yeah. Me too, although I need to get out more probably, but yeah, it is. I think you're correct on that.
Yeah. So you're at South Dakota State. You're lecturing in philosophy and religion. Now,
yes,
I didn't really know all this about you until I, you know, did some digging around.
Google, or your private eye service.
I Google stalked you, George. But
there's plenty to stalk out there, isn't there?
Your project is actually your book sounds actually quite interesting, where you look at Evagrius and cognitive science.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if you saw. I'm gonna plug a previous episode of my show here with Robin Darling Young was on maybe like a month or so, and we talked about Evagrius. And one of the things that I always like to talk about when I talk about Evagrius is he's quite relevant for modern psychology, clinical psychology. How did you come into that? How did you come into asking these questions?
So this is an interesting thing. I don't know how much I can say on the air here, because there's some interesting subtext too. But so I was interested in doing something with, I mean, I was in a religion and science program, in theology program, and I wanted to do something with patristics and science. So that was where my starting point was. And actually, at this particular school I was at, they don't have a strong patristics program. So that was going to be tricky. You know, Irenaeus actually was an option initially to look at. I thought about some different things. But there was a classmate of mine, although I don't think we ever had actual class together, and she was Orthodox, and her husband is Father Elijah Mueller, and he's an Orthodox priest. And so I sat down with them, and I sat down with him specifically and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this. What would you suggest?" And he gave me some options, and Evagrius was one of them. And I had a text. I wonder if it's behind me here. Oh, it's somewhere. I think it's right here. Here it is. I had this text here, the Wisdom of the Byzantine Church by Andrew Louth.
Oh yeah.
And it has Evagrius here. And I picked this up at some book sale or something a long time ago. And so I was familiar with Evagrius from that, or at least I knew of him. And it's Evagrius of Pontus, or Evagrius Ponticus, and my family actually is from Pontus, on my father's side. So there's kind of a long history there, and actually a few generations back, they were Orthodox priests in that community. And now there was the population exchange due to some not so great circumstances in Turkey and Greece, that my family was moved to northern Greece. But there was that history, so that kind of resonated with me. So I actually didn't know a lot about Evagrius other than what this conversation had kind of borne out. But that kind of put me down that path. And once I got into it, it was clear that there were a lot of connections. And if I'm being honest, and I always try to be, that's a horrible lead, isn't it? I'm going to be honest with you. I normally lie. No. Yeah, I mean, I think
not a lie if you believe it.
Well, that's what George Costanza thinks. But George Tsakiridis says, tell the truth. And so what I would say is, in research in general, though, I do tend to see these connections in places, and I'll just throw myself into it and kind of hope it works out. Like it is a scientific approach in the sense that, like, I'm going to hypothesize that this might connect, and then you dive in and you find out it does. And that's kind of what happened here. And we had done a cognitive science seminar in religion and science at my grad school. And so there was already in the background, and I started to put these things together. And I ended up with my advisor was Robert Cathy at McCormick Theological Seminary. And he had some background with Paul Ricoeur, and there's some interesting stuff I could do with that. And it all came together and was this project. So basically, I look at the 8 thoughts of Evagrius and put them into dialogue kind of with modern cognitive science and psychology to look at how, and my underlying project, if you want to look at my like theological project as a scholar, that sounds pretentious, but but that's kind of what I'm doing, is showing how Christian tradition is relevant in the modern day, and that these guys were onto a lot of things. And it's not something we should just relegate to mythology or the past, that we should look at what they're saying because it does coincide with what we see in modern science. It doesn't mean they're always right or that their language is always right, but it's really relevant. So that's what happened in that project. And then in the subsequent projects I looked at with guilt and forgiveness, I looked at kind of the science of emotion and how that related to, like John Chrysostom's work and Cyprian of Carthage and reconciliation and some of those issues.
I think Evagrius, and Robin Darling Young and I were talking about this, he kind of gets pigeonholed into this category as a monastic theorist. But his work on the 8 principal thoughts, as you say, so these 8 principal thoughts, for the people who probably don't know, these later get translated into Latin as the 7 deadly sins, more or less by Gregory the Great. But Evagrius comes in a long line of philosophers, Stoics, Middle Platonists, and Galen, who were working out human behavior and causes of human behavior. And they talk about the relationship between sense perception and cognition, so how we interpret stimuli and then how we judge and then act on them. And this is the tradition that Evagrius is finding himself in. And he seems to me, so you bring up this notion of guilt and these notions of guilt and forgiveness. One thing that strikes me when reading monastic literature is that so many of the problems that they talk about with respect to moral action and cognition stem from conflicts within their monastic communities. So they're dealing with how to work with other people, how to live with other people. So guilt and forgiveness would naturally emerge as pretty important concepts for these individuals to figure out what they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, theology, I hesitate to say what I'm about to say, but theology is contextual. I mean, it is tied to historical events and the way it develops. It's kind of, necessity is the mother of invention. So as we face issues in real life, we end up having to work through them theologically. So that does happen in these communities. And I think in the modern day also. I do think that phrase can be misused too, where theology becomes kind of torn out of its original context also to apply it in a pragmatic way. That can be bad, I think. But yeah, there's the monastic communities that are going on in the 4th century are kind of in the background while all of the doctrinal stuff is getting hammered out, with the Roman Empire and in the wake of Constantine. And Evagrius is really bridges those worlds, because he's coming from, he was a deacon for Gregory Nazianzen, and then he was right at the center of the Council of Constantinople, 381, leading up to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ends up in the desert due to, maybe some poor choices or circumstances. And like a lot of us do.
Yeah.
And he brings, though, that intellectual, theological, philosophical training to the desert. And so he really bridges those worlds in a way that not too many people have. And he also took some flack for that too. Some people in the Egyptian desert thought he was, this smart Greek guy, and he wasn't, like the pure monastic because of that. He was bringing too much philosophy into it.
Mm-hmm.
But he does a great job of bridging those worlds. And of course, then he gets caught up with Origen, as you're familiar, in 553 after the fact, and these guys get condemned.
Mm-hmm.
And so like Evagrian theology affects like the theology of prayer, basically moving forward, especially in the Orthodox Church. But then he doesn't get credit for it because he was condemned. So you have other thinkers that use his stuff that get the credit for him, or instead of him. And I think what happened in the last 20 to 30 years is there was kind of this resurgence in Evagrian study, and to give him credit and dig into his stuff more. And so you have like authors like Augustine Cassidy,
Mm-hmm.
and then Sienkiewicz, who did he was at University of Toronto. So did you ever take a course with him, or did you have any connection with him?
No, he was gone by the time I got here, but I have.
Okay.
Yeah, Bob Sienkiewicz was at the Pontifical Institute.
Oh, there you go. You have the Evagrian Bible there.
I do. I have it all.
That made my dissertation work way easier than it would have been like 20 years ago.
So, talk a little bit about your dissertation. What were some of the intersections you found between Evagrius and like modern cognitive psychology?
So, I mean, part of it is, and it's been a while, so
I'm asking you to reach back, but
reach back and read this foreign book here. Let me pull my book off the shelf here. I got a copy here.
Save the whale, George.
This looks like it was planned, but this is just my office is a mess, as you can see, because I actually work. So I, have books everywhere. But yeah, this is the book. Woo. You can buy it very inexpensively. But what it does is so there's one fun thing it does is, so the Eugene de Quilly and Andrew Newberg did a lot of work with psychology and cognitive science and brain states.
Mm-hmm.
And basically they had this idea of absolute unitary being, that when you reach higher states of meditation, that they did these brain scans with blood flow and stuff. But when you reach these higher levels of meditation, that the area that creates boundaries, spatial boundaries, actually disappears in your brain. So this idea, like Buddhism talks about being at one with everything. That feeling might be explained scientifically by these higher states of meditation. And they did an experiment where, and this is a while back now, so there's been more since, I assume, but that they took Cistercian nuns and Buddhist monks. Let me grab a drink of water. That's like building tension for everybody. And they got them to these higher brain states, and this is just kind of old school. They tied a string to their finger, and when they reached the high state, they were supposed to move their finger. I don't know how you do that while you're in that state, so we'll look at it, but that they would find that these states are the same. And so their hypothesis, I think, is that maybe religions are similar in this way. Now, I can agree with the science side of that. I don't agree with maybe the religious side. But we see some similar language in Evagrius, that, he moves from contemplation of material things to immaterial things to eventually the place of God. And there's the sapphire blue light.
The Saphiric light, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, so all of these sorts of things. And it's been a while since I wrote this, but if you look at the language, there's some kind of interesting parallels with what we found in the modern science and that. Then we can also look at this from a psychological standpoint and how he combats the demons using kind of some psychological tricks.
More tension.
And so when he does that, you got to go with the water or whatever is in that bottle. It could be vodka or something.
Booze,
that's
yeah.
Causing, yeah, no. That's are killing me here.
Never mind.
But so that he actually uses psychological methods in some ways to combat the demons. Like replacing one thought with another. So if you're having this one, you're struggling with this thought, you replace it with another thought, which doesn't make any sense in a way, like replace this evil with this evil, but it shakes you out of this. And there are psychological methods that I think we could see parallel that. So there's a lot of practical wisdom in what he's doing that also mirrors the modern, science in both psychology and cognitive science. And I don't know if anyone has furthered this work a lot, much in the last few years, but I think like any good dissertation, I was rushing to get it published before the science became outdated. But I think it is kind of a primer for where we could go. And there's been more publications since. I mean, Robin Darling Young and a couple others have done some pretty major publications since the time I think this came out.
Yeah, well, one of my master's professors, Columbus Stewart's done a lot with Evagrius, and because he does have this notion of imageless prayer. He was so concerned with depicting God in bodily form and any kind of mental representation, during prayer as a distraction. And so he's got this notion of imageless prayer.
Yeah, I'm opening this book because I was looking for the article that I believe was, the imageless prayer and the theological vision of Evagrius Ponticus by Columbus Stewart.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually a really, if it's the article I'm thinking of, that's a great article. He does a really masterful job of putting that into kind of understandable terms, but really struggling with the depth. And it's really great you got to study with him.
Yeah, well, he always complained that article took a lot out of him. It took him a long time to write it because Evagrius he's a difficult person to read and to comprehend. But there might be something to what you're saying with meditation and the problems that emerge during it. I mean, one of the things that Evagrius and his pupil John Cashin talk about when they're at prayer is the distractions that emerge, different thoughts pop up that distract the individual. So Evagrius wasn't just being abstract, but he was actually dealing with a real monastic problem of how to achieve this perfect level of prayer or meditation. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, so I think, and that's I think you're kind of getting at another point that's important here is whether he's dealing with actual demons or metaphorical demons kind of from a modern standpoint. And I think that depends on what one's angelology is and, those sorts of issues. We don't have to go down that path.
No, but I think Evagrius would probably have no problem saying that they were actual demons who were kind of giving rise to these thoughts that would distract the monk at prayer or at work. I mean, what's the big one is Acedia.
Through this because there's a quote that, I mean, I think anyone who's in academia can relate to that for sure, of the 8 thoughts. But I was looking for a quote here, but he actually has a quote that uses language, and it does depend on the translation a bit, but uses language that when you do kind of approach pure prayer, and this is from his chapters on prayer, I think chapters 72 and 73, where it talks about like the demon touching the spot in the mind and like actually changing the way that it talks about like the, if I could read this one, a man experienced in the Gnostic life said that this happens under the influence of the passion of vainglory and that the demon who touches a place in the brain and causes palpitations in the blood vessels. So he's actually using kind of physical language to describe these spiritual things. So it really does cross, medicine and science, religion and science. I'm sorry, medicine and religion, religion and science in ways that are really advanced for his time. And I think we can draw a lot from that now still.
That's a great chapter, because what he's saying there is, if you think that you've achieved the state of pure prayer, you better think again.
Yeah.
Don, what was the class?
What's that, Don?
What was the class that we, speaking of Pappas earlier, because we covered a whole lot of this with Dr. Prasis. If you remember that?
Yeah.
What class was that? She
Was it
covered a lot of those texts, and I remember the students being, it wasn't just Evagrius, but we were covering others. But I remember the astonishment at how relevant these psychological insights were, despite, as you said, being in the desert. Some of them solitary, some in communities. But what was the name of that course again? Do you remember?
It was something about combating the thoughts, something along those lines.
I'm actually trying to look this up here. Since we're on Zoom, we can do this.
Yeah, I probably have the course book here somewhere.
Taming the thoughts or something like that. Yeah, that was a great.
Yes, taming the thoughts.
Taming the thoughts. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that was a great.
Stasis in the monastic writings.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that was good. I mean, and I think she was working on Evagrius at the time as well. So a lot of that course pack was covering some of that. And actually, I think she wrote on Evagrius in our edited volume that I put out as well. But I don't remember what she wrote for that. It's too long now. But it's amazing how relevant these ancient writers can be, though. Man alive.
100%.
Yeah. And I think, we've really seen a resurgence in the last 20 years with this. And it's similar. Like if you look back at when a lot of the writings or secondary sources on patristics were written, we're looking at like late 19th, early 20th century, especially late 19th. I think we've seen kind of that kind of resurgence again in the late 20th, early 21st.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, because I think it does have something to do with what Don just said, is that people have woken up to their relevance. And Don's got to go at 5. He just sent me a text. I've got 5 minutes.
Very subtle.
It's not. I've got 5.M. It's right here.
George, after he's done a good almost dozen interviews now with some leading scholars in the world, and I thought to myself yesterday, I bet you John's just so refined now and professional. He must just be a real pro at this.
I'm not Penske material, Don.
I'm just kidding. I
try and keep it loose. I think it's important to have fun with academics. So, some people like that, some people don't. But I've awoken the inner Seinfeld in John.
George, you should have seen John and I at Oxford. I don't know where you were, but I don't
that would
think
be fun.
I still think that there's certain scholars out there that haven't recovered from the shockwave of.
Well, I thought we had scared Nathan. I thought we had scared Nathan Betts away, but he seems to have recovered quite nicely.
He circled back. Yeah.
See, I've seen, like, looking at the list of scholars you've been interviewing, you've had this with. I was figuring, like, this week you're going to slum it a little bit with me.
No, I don't. I thought we could have a very friendly discussion because we're all friends.
Oh no, this is great. No, you've really been able to get some great scholars. Is maybe a better way of putting that.
Well, if you want to feel really bad about yourself, you can always console yourself with a thought that I've got Robert Louis Wilkin coming on tomorrow. So
exactly. So you're slumming it with Robert Louis Wilkin, obviously.
This is like a prep. No, I wish more people could read some of these materials because they do have a lot of value for today. We had Louis Ayres on here. Don and I were chatting with him a couple months ago. And he's asking the question, well, why do we read these people and why do we study them? And it's like, well, we do because we think they're important somehow. And I think Evagrius is one of these individuals who, some people will say that a renewed interest has been renewed because we're in this postmodern age where we're wanting to tear down old power structures and resurrect people who have been condemned. But there's much more to it than that. I mean, Evagrius is a profound thinker. Yeah. Robin Young would say that he's a scholar in his own right. He was a biblical scholar before he was a monk. But anybody who reads him can't help but be struck by how prescient some of his observations were. I mean, you had mentioned earlier, that he's got this notion that if an evil thought arises, you attack it with another one. And he's got, what is it, the anti-redikos, where he said he presents like, what is it, like 160 some biblical passages, and each one is used as a weapon against a particular wicked thought. I mean, it's just fascinating. And
yeah, I think that's one of the misconceptions people have or have had maybe about Evagrius is that it's all speculative thinking, or he's just out there. But I mean, everything he's doing is rooted in scripture and prayer. And he was coming out of what was going on with the Christological and the Trinitarian controversies. So I mean, he's very rooted in central orthodoxy. Yeah. And maybe that's what allows him to do some speculative thinking. But we have to kind of remember that he is starting there. And I think that's important. And I think part of the reason we read texts like this, or we continue to read them, is because there's something that resonates with us in those texts. And there's just a lot of wisdom there. And modern writing can be good, but it cannot be sometimes. Yeah. It hasn't stood the test of time as some of these texts have. So we'll, in 2,000 years, 1,500 years, we'll see, how Evagrius Ponticus and cognitive science holds up, or any of the books you're going to write. But I mean, like, we have the benefit of, these have stood the test of time. People have gone back to them for hundreds of years. There's a reason for that.
Yeah. No, I think you bring up a fascinating point, and I think you're absolutely right. It's, now Evagrius Ponticus and cognitive science will certainly last the test of time.
Clearly.
But I don't think anything Don or I write will be read 2,000 years from now. But I'm almost certain that if Evagrius and Origen and Irenaeus have lasted this long, they're going to last another 1,500, 2,000 years.
Yeah. And this is with the headwinds of, heresy kind of in their face. But I mean, if you look at the connection, I mean, the movement from Clement of Alexandria to Origen to Evagrius, I mean, there's a lot of philosophical wisdom in that arc. Just the misunderstanding, like, especially with Clement, there's just a lot of misunderstanding about what he was saying. And it kind of put him behind the eight ball, which is how most scholars would describe it, I'm sure. Behind the eight ball.
Behind the eight ball.
Yeah.
That's quite right. Now, another one of our Pappas friends, C.J. Schmidt, works on Clement and his use of medical knowledge at the time.
Oh, wow. I need to see, I hope if he's published, I need to read some of that. That's great.
Well, he's finished with his PhD, I think, isn't he, Don?
Yeah, he is. But I don't know. I don't know if his dissertation has been published, or okay. I gotta dig that stuff out.
Yeah, well, maybe I can get him on Patristicast here. Maybe we can have a Pappas reunion on Patristicast.
There you go.
Like a cage match or something.
A cage match.
I don't know. I got Don's attention with that there.
All you need to do for CJ and John is get them on. What were you playing? Pickleball or?
It was hockey. It was that hockey game.
What do you?
Table hockey or whatever. Right?
Air hockey.
Air hockey. I dominated him.
George, I've never seen something so disturbing in my life. These two, it was just way too intense. Little scary. I'll be honest.
Well, that's a conflagration of I don't know, pride and lust or something there to connect back to Evagrius.
Yeah, well, I think Evagrius would say, well, what do you expect when you put two elite athletes on opposite sides of an air hockey table?
I don't know. I can't touch that. My
even try.
hermeneutics don't reach that far.
So I think one of the things that you had suggested we touch on, and it's something that is really above my pay grade, but you've been working recently, and you've got this. Is it a conference coming up on theology and Spider-Man, or a workshop? What is this?
I have actually a book. So I just
it's a
turned
book.
in the manuscript on that. So there's a popular culture and theology series, or theology and popular culture, I think is with Lexington Books and Fortress Academic.
Okay.
And I think it's like popularcultureandtheology.com. You can go there's a blog, and but they've created this series to actually engage. It's an academic series to engage the academic theology with popular culture. And so I edited a volume on Spider-Man, and the chapter I wrote was on basically using some Spider-Man, like the old 1967 theme song and some other and something else, put it into dialogue with Christian creeds. So actually it was patristic in its nature. So it is relevant here. And actually a friend of ours, Dr. David K. Gooden, also wrote a chapter for that volume dealing with Moses the Ethiopian, the Desert Father.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's got some patristic representation in it, but it deals with a lot of classical theological themes and Spider-Man.
And Spider-Man.
Well, it's Spider-Man is a superhero that has two natures, both man and spider.
Okay.
So there's some fun things you can do with it.
There, I see it. Okay. Well,
there's some fun things you could do with it.
It's not completely
orthodox.
Well, it's not completely orthodox for sure, but I remember maybe like 20 years ago or so when what's that trilogy with Keanu Reeves?
The Matrix.
The Matrix came out. Yes, that's right, The Matrix. And there was a professor, he was actually the dean at the St. John's School of Theology and Seminary where I was at the time. He was a Kierkegaard scholar, but he would always talk about the Christological underpinnings of the Matrix trilogy. And I never really understood it, but I would say for like the past 2 decades or so, at least, theology and pop culture have been a subject of growing interest.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, this series is kind of maybe a culmination of some of that interest. Actually, David Gooden and I we're co-editing another volume in the series on theology and Breaking Bad. So we're doing some fun stuff, but I think, by delving into popular culture and discussing it with these theological themes, it allows people to access some kind of deeper level theology in a way that might be more fun. And so, it's a way of reaching out and spreading the theological and patristic love across, genres.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah. But I mean, like, you use the culture of the day. But I mean, honestly, I'm doing this in large part because it's fun. I'm doing things with, some things I like, and it's turned out pretty well. But yeah, we're editing that right now. And I wrote another chapter on Spider-Man and Mysterio as Antichrist for a Religion and Marvel Universe volume. So yeah, I'm doing some fun stuff. So I'm doing some applied theology with my patristics and religion and science.
Now, are you teaching stuff too?
Teaching what?
Are you teaching courses on this at South Dakota State?
No, not directly. I mean, we're a small program, and I teach a lot of generals. Okay. So I integrate some of this material into my courses, but I don't teach any seminars.
I mean, gentlemen, I have to run.
All right,
I have to run. Forgive me. Good to see you, George.
Bye, Don.
See you later, Donnie. I mean, I would think that
now we can really talk. Okay.
Yeah. Now it's time for the men to do it. Whatever.
Now it's just a Seinfeld showdown.
Well, one of the things that when I got to Toronto and I got to know faculty here, I knew I was in the right place because I was in a conversation once after one of our weekly masses at St. Mike's, and the conversation involved all three subjects: theology, hockey, and Seinfeld. And I was like, I'm in the right spot. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else because these are the three things.
Theology, hockey, and Seinfeld.
You know,
That's solid stuff.
I can't think of three other subjects I'd rather talk about.
That's pretty good.
But I would just think that you know, given young people these days, and I don't know what it's like, you know, because I'm old enough to be a parent of many of your students, but the linkage of theology and pop culture might actually be a novel way of getting younger people interested in the study of theology.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I'm all for, I mean, you know, I'm a confessing Christian myself, so I don't approach this just as an academic endeavor. It, you know, it's important to me. So I think any way to get people interested in that and to understand kind of like, especially with patristics, I mean, I think one of the challenges, I mean, I come from a Protestant background as Don does. In the Protestant circles, patristics aren't always, you know, at the forefront.
Right.
And so finding ways we can integrate that and help people understand the tradition is good.
There's been a bit of a resource mall within Protestant circles of patristics within the last couple of decades, at least.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's part of what has driven, I'm guessing, you know, some of the growth in patristics is because you have this entity. And in the United States, Protestantism is, you know, one of the major religious traditions represented. So that, yeah, that's connected. I mean, you have, you know, like Thomas Oden and like the,
Yes, that's right.
yeah, the Ancient Christian Writers commentary series and that kind of stuff. But there's more tools than ever. And I'm enjoying that because it makes our job a lot easier.
Yeah, technology has really helped advance the field. It's so much easier now to track down resources. Don was just telling me before we got started that he's got the Logos Bible software.
Yeah.
You can just, you know, plug in a Greek term and he finds so many different places where it's used.
Yeah.
In the Christian tradition. It's just so much easier that way.
I mean, it's amazing. You save so much time versus looking, you know, in the old Liddell and Scott. You know, I have an unabridged over here that's that huge book behind me there.
Yep.
I mean, like going through and finding usages of words would take so much longer. So it is amazing.
Sometimes I wonder though if we don't lose something in this as well, because you know the scholars who came before us, you know, from middle of the 20th century, early 20th century, they had such a command of the ancient languages. Sometimes I wonder if the improved technology doesn't come with some unintended trade-offs, such as, you know, not being able to, or not having to look up a word in a physical book, if that doesn't do something to the process of acquiring languages.
Well, I mean, yeah, there is, I think, some research and probably will be more about how kind of the tactile element of learning. I mean, people aren't writing, you know, cursive anymore, and how that affects learning and all of these sorts of things. I mean, the book, the book as a concept is still one of the greatest technologies of the last, you know, 2000 years.
Well, and Christianity had a big part to play in the development of the book. Right? The rise of the Codex, which is pretty much the ancient form of that's closest to what we consider the book. You know, with the spine and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, like, you know, the Christian scriptures really have done a lot to drive that development.
That's right.
And I think that's why it's also important to study the Christian scriptures, even if you are not a believer in them. And so like next spring, I'll be teaching a course on New Testament here at South Dakota State, which is, you know, since it's a state university, I'll be teaching that from a, you know, very neutral standpoint. And I'll get students from various backgrounds. And I think one of the selling points for studying the New Testament is that very influence upon both technology and literacy and truth and all of these things.
Are you familiar with Larry Hurtado? You know who that is?
I don't think so. The name sounds familiar, but no, I don't believe
so. He's got a couple of good books. They're back there.
Oh, here we go.
Where are they? He's got one, the earliest Christian artifacts,
Okay.
and he looks at how books are produced and what some of the characterizing features of early Christian books, such as their use of like the stavrogram, you know, the symbol of the cross, and or the chi rho as Christian symbols used as for shorthand for like the name of Jesus. He looks at the development of the codex, which is, you know, a book that you would open rather than a book roll, you know, that you unfold.
Yeah.
And then he's got this one, The Destroyer of the Gods, which is a great book. A book in a chapter in here where he looks at early Christianity as a bookish religion and how the book played a really vital role in the rise and spread of Christianity. I wanted to get him on this series, but then I found out that he died maybe like a year or two ago, I think of cancer or something like that. But yeah, he's kind of been one of the pioneers in this field of book culture and early Christianity, which is it's really a burgeoning field right now.
That does sound good. I think so. Listeners, check those out.
That's right. Yeah, they're worth actually getting. Fascinating books. Anyway,
that's good.
George, thank you for joining Patristicast today.
Yes. Well, I'm glad to be here. That was fun.
You know, I was actually quite serious when I suggested we should get a bunch of us from Pappas on here and have like a Pappas Patristics episode where we talk about our favorite Pappas moments.
Oh boy.
Or material Pappas or something.
Do you guys have a paywall? I can put that behind the paywall maybe. No, that is a good idea. We could do like a full Brady Bunch screen for that.
I think that would be spectacular.
Or like Hollywood Squares.
Hollywood Squares, there you go.
But yeah, that sounds good. I mean, you guys are, I am impressed with the interviews you've gotten. You've gotten some great scholars on here.
Oh, I've loved them all. I have really enjoyed each one of these conversations. They've been illuminating in many ways, talking to these people who have really put in some hard work, you know, and from which we're benefiting. Us, the younger scholars, are benefiting.
Yeah.
And having an hour or so to pick their brains, I think is a good thing.
That's definitely true.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that, I mean, I appreciate that. Says a lot about them that they've been generous with their time. And,
yeah, there were some that I thought they're not going to want to come and talk to somebody they've never met before, some clown, but no, they've all been very generous with their time. And yeah, I hope, I hope more people start watching this, because I think I don't want this to be just for scholars. You know, I'm hoping that people can, a wider audience, you know, can benefit from learning a little bit more about the early church.
That's why I'll keep referencing Seinfeld with you, and we can, you know, catch a new demographic.
You know, the thing is, the Seinfeld never dies. You know, it just it lives forever.
It just gets uncensored on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
That's right.
Which is pretty much true.
I think it is. Yeah, you get Larry David in the Raw.
Yeah, you do. But that's good. Yeah, but yeah, thanks for having me on, and I wish you guys luck moving forward.
Thank you very much, George. We'll talk to you later.
All right, I'll see you.
See you later, my friend.